At 7 o'clock, welcome you all at home and at the City Hall. It's a virtual meeting where the Plan Commission members and other participants are using Zoom and our telephone. Coronavirus pandemic has changed our lives and how we do things. Our businesses and people are suffering. Our economy is taking a big hit. We are all hoping this will end in the near future. Thanks to all of you for following the social distance. Big thanks to all our city staff and the election workers who manage the absentee ballots as well as the in-person polling at this very difficult time. Thanks to all of you who took risks and came out to vote. Our city staff is working hard to provide essential city services to all our citizens. Many are working from home. Our first responders, fire, EMS, and police are providing all the needed protection to all of us. Thank you. I'm looking forward to working with all of you together to make our city even a better place for all of us. I'm going to open the meeting of the Plan Commission for Tuesday, April 14th, 2022 order. And the first item is the roll call.
Yes. So roll call. Brar?
Yes.
Ramsey?
Here.
Paulson?
Here.
Tyson?
Here.
Hubbard?
Here.
Slavish? I didn't see Slavish join the call. And Murray is also absent this evening.
Oh.
She had something come up.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is we don't have a public hearing until.
Do you want me to quickly go over?
Oh, yes, yes, Abby, yes.
Okay.
Please.
So thanks to everybody who.
Abby, you want to identify yourself?
Oh, yes. Hello. I'm Abby Attoon. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Middleton. I am physically present right now at the council chambers at City Hall. And we have seven folks here who are physically present, and I wanted to name all of those people here for the record. Mayor Brar is here. Mark Opitz, our city planner, is here. George Zen, Jeremy Crosby, Jim Pulvermacher, Jake Funds are all present here at City Hall. In addition to allowing up to 10 people in the room this evening, we have the Zoom call. Some people are joining by audio and by video. Some people are only joining by audio. And in order to make sure that it's clear to people who are only joining by audio who is speaking, at the beginning of your remarks, it would be very helpful if you could state your name, even if you've already introduced yourselves before, just so that people who are on the phone will know who is speaking at that time. The last option for joining this evening is we are live streaming this on the city's YouTube page. So that's for folks who want to listen in, but they don't want to actively participate in the meeting. So that gives people 3 options for participating in the Plan Commission. That's one more option than people normally have available. So we're trying to make the best of bad circumstances and make this as open and available to as many people as we possibly can. I also have my cell phone here, and my phone number was included on the agenda for the meeting in case anybody has any technical difficulties accessing the meeting. And I haven't received any messages yet from anyone who's having trouble, but I'll keep watch on my phone just in case. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is we're holding our first virtual public hearing. We are also going to open it up to people who are present here in the room to speak. And for that, If you're participating via the Zoom and you would like to speak during the public hearing, the best way to do that is to use the raise hand feature in Zoom. And the way that you do the raise hand is during the meeting, you can click on the icon at the bottom of your screen that is labeled participants, and then that will open a window on the right-hand side of your screen, and then you can click on raise hand. I know that some people during the last meeting had trouble accessing the raise hand feature, and so we're going to certainly open it up for people at the end to just unmute themselves and feel free to speak at that point. And that will also be an opportunity for folks who are only joining via audio to speak. So everyone will have an opportunity to speak during the public hearing. We did just have one other person who's joined us and is physically present in the room. That puts us at 8 people. If we get to 10, we would then need to ask people who are here for other agenda items to leave and hang out in the lobby area so that we don't get over 10 people within the council chambers. And we have the chairs set up so that everybody is more than 6 feet apart.
Okay. So we are going to go to the first item on the agenda. That's the approval of the minutes of March 24th, 2020.
And we have some changes that Plan Commissioner Tyson had requested, and we included those changes in the packet. So the recommendation is to approve the minutes of the meeting with the changes.
And specifically to approve the draft minutes as published on the city's website is how I sent out some guidance this afternoon.
You need to mute yourself for your feedback.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Okay,
I'll move approval of the minutes.
Second. Hubbard, second.
Okay, so moved by Brar and seconded by Hubbard. Thank you.
Approve the draft minutes as published on the city's website. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor of the...
Just a second, Mayor. I don't know if anybody else had comments or not. There's a lot of people. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to make sure people had a chance to comment. Okay.
Does anybody have any comments? Okay, hearing no comments, I'm going to call for approval of the minutes as amended. We're going to, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, so the minutes are approved unanimously. The next item on the agenda item is item number 1, specific implementation plan modification for parking lot extension for PPD 3225 Diamond Way. Mark?
Yes, this item is out in the Airport Road Business Park at this location. And there's an 82,000 square foot building that is increasing building capacity to about 400 people. And to support that, they are adding 219 parking spaces on an adjoining lot. We have reviewed the plans and for both the design of the parking as well as the lighting and landscaping, and everything complies with city requirements. So I recommend, the staff recommendation is approval as a minor SIP modification.
So moved. Hubbard, move as a minor SIP modification.
I second that.
Okay. So the Lee Hubbard has made the motion to approve and the Kitty Tyson has seconded the motion. Any questions or comments?
Nope.
Nope.
We are on the item number 1, which is the SIP modification for the parking lot expansion for PPD, our biggest employer, from 3225 Diamond Way. Okay, if there are no further comments, I'm going to call for approval of the motion for SIP modification for parking lot expansion. All those in favor of this motion say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, so the motion passes unanimously.
And Mayor, I would note that Mike Slash has joined as well, just
Okay.
for our records. I don't know when he joined, but
Yeah, sorry, had some technical issues connecting. My bad.
Mike, were you present during that vote that was just taken for PPD's parking lot expansion?
I was, Abby,
yeah,
yeah.
I think that's why I pointed to it.
Okay, so let's include that. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so do we have, we still have 4 more minutes.
We could go to the window art for Middleton Center 3.
Item number 3.
Item number 2 in the packet.
2.
Oh, okay.
Implementation.
All right. We are on item number 2, specific implementation plan modification for window art element, Middleton Central Phase 3, 1800 Parliament Street. Abby?
Sure. So during the course of design review for the Middleton Center Phase 3 development, this is the portion that is on the south side of the railroad tracks and is under construction currently. There was some concern that was raised about there being parking on the first floor and what that would mean to a pedestrian who's walking by the windows. And so we were trying to come up with a creative design solution that would provide visual interest to somebody who is passing by rather than just looking through the window and seeing cars parked in that first floor level. And so the solution that was arrived upon was to install some sort of art element. And we had talked about a number of options. I think there were, let me show you the precedent images, we'll say, that were included in the staff report. So we had talked about like maybe something that would be metal, that would be inset into the windows a bit to provide some kind of visual interest. It would be designed by an artist. We had planned to take it to the city's public art committee for a recommendation back to the plan commission. And what has happened is, well, for one, the Public Arts Committee is not considered an essential committee, so it's not currently meeting. And so we haven't taken anything to the Public Arts Committee. The developer has now applied for a building permit, but what they are proposing, I didn't feel comfortable signing off and approving it at a staff level because I felt that it was different enough from what was discussed that without any guidance from the Plan Commission, I wouldn't feel comfortable approving it administratively. Jake Bunce is here from T-Wall and can probably answer any questions that you might have, but what they're proposing is a vinyl applied directly to the window. They say that this will be less costly, but also they were concerned that there's not space to install some sort of vertical element. And if there were a vertical element, it would be really difficult for them to get around it to clean the interior of the windows. This is a much less costly option, and also they are the added benefit that was discussed for this public art installation is that also it would block the lights from shining through the windows, and we have single-family residences on the south side of Terrace Avenue right across the street that we were concerned about. We didn't want lights shining into the windows. So this is what they're proposing. It was included in the packet. The Middleton Center logo would not appear on all of the windows. It would it would only appear on a couple of the windows, and then the rest would have this, right?
Well, so either one. Please come to the microphone.
I'm Jake Bunce with T-Wall Enterprises. So those were two different concept designs just for you guys to look at. It could be either or. I think it would look better if it was more consistent across all the windows, and there's 8 windows, just so you guys know.
Okay, so that was Jake Bunds with T-Wall Enterprises.
So, Abby, would there be some way to take it to the art committee?
We could request permission from the city administrator to hold an arts committee meeting.
Or you could send it to them, or?
We wouldn't be able to send it to them and ask for feedback because I think that that would probably violate the open meetings requirements. But the way that we've been directed currently is that only the plan commission and the council are meeting unless we get permission from the city administrator to hold another type of meeting.
So how do you feel about it, about these 2 designs?
I mean, I feel like I personally wouldn't necessarily call it public art. I would think that it looks more commercial. I would be surprised if the Public Arts Committee would view it as meeting the criteria that was established. But ultimately, the Plan Commission approved design review and was the entity that created the requirements initially, so I also would feel just as comfortable having the Plan Commission weigh in with a recommendation.
Okay, so let's have your input.
Abby,
Yes,
this is Kurt Paulson. Procedural question. If we had to refer this to Arts Committee, which again, you're not recommending, but if we did, how would that delay T-Wall's timing on this phase 3?
So right now we're in a bit of a holding pattern. We're kind of taking it week by week. We have an early start permit right now, and that can only take us so far in the process of building. So the building permit is needed somewhat soon. I don't know when the Public Arts Committee is planning on meeting next. I'm not sure you guys do either, just because of everything that's going on. So if it were up to us, we'd like to settle it in the Plan Commission and not have to wait. But that's something that you guys have to decide.
Is it possible that we could approve everything else except this study?
generally, we want to have all of the contingencies of approval satisfied prior to issuing a building permit. We have two people who have their hands raised. They are Kurt Paulson and Susan West.
I already spoke, sorry.
Okay.
City Hall as a backdrop.
May I speak? May I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a suggestion, and this is done in Middleton Hills at the Pick and Save store. When it was put in, there were areas that had of glass windows, but they had cases in back of them, which made for a very ugly view from outside. What they did is had Pick and Save, or actually it was cops at the time, put this same kind of material on, but they were photographs. I could see that would be much more artistic if Terrence or T-Wall could put photographs from the city, from the surrounding area or so on temporarily till something could be presented to, in a year or two, to the Arts Committee.
So we aren't completely set or stuck on that design per se, but we do just kind of more so what we came here for was we were kind of looking to get the window vinyls instead of steel behind the window, just because the lack of room, it's already a narrow site to begin with, the lack of room in the drive aisle and the parking stalls. And then we just more of, the window vinyl, because it'd be easier for us. It's a lot more cost effective. But like I said, the design isn't set in stone. We can go back with ideas that you guys have and work that out.
Another similar project is the Starbucks on Allen Boulevard. They ran into some issues with their project, and it resulted in a bathroom against a window on the back. And so the Public Arts Committee held a design competition. We got about 50 proposals, and working with the Starbucks marketing folks, they arrived at a design that was done by a local student. It was like it's a map of Middleton. If you've been to the Starbucks, you might have noticed it there. And it is a vinyl application.
P.T. Tyson.
Yeah, I took the point that you made, Abby, to heart. I guess it was a little bit of my reaction to this as well. When I looked at the image on page 36 of your package, that's the one that says Middleton Center on it, the one, yeah. To me, that one starts to smack a little bit of commercialism and what you're trying to avoid by along Terrace Avenue, across the street from these people's houses. And I guess I'd prefer not to see advertising on the street like that. Or anyway, so the next page, 37, with the dots, is a fairly artistic and simple rendition of an idea, especially given that this is a garage and we're not looking to try to attract attention to the building or to the garage windows, and we're trying to make it part of the background. I think this is much less offensive than a whole lot of other alternatives that we could come up with. I loved your tree thing, but since that's not possible, unless maybe they can do the same tree image in vinyl, I don't have any problems with this one, to be honest. Just something straight and simple, a pleasing art piece along all the windows, and just be done with it, you know?
So this is a question for T-Wall. So the glass, on these, on this parking structure, is that elevation sit exactly on the property line?
Yeah.
So there's no setback with that elevation from the property line, correct?
No setback.
It looks like Susan West has her hand raised again.
No, I don't. I'm sorry. I didn't turn it off.
Okay, sorry, I forgot to turn it off.
Okay.
Oh,
anyone
okay.
have-
Abby, it's Kurt again. One more question. Sorry. Would people be interested in having the same design in all 8 windows, or a different design in each window? I'm uncertain myself, but people who are more artistic could guide us on that.
Yes, Kitty, you have something to say.
Do. Gurdeep, I think given that it's a parking garage, you don't want to start drawing attention to it, from the standpoint of it having lots of different designs and patterns, unless there was something just that's very backgroundy about it, unless it's serious art, in which case, then it's a whole heck of a lot more than just a parking garage. But I don't think that's where we're going with this. I think they just wanted something that obscured the fact that there were headlights on sometimes in the garage for the people that lived across the street or that walked by. And I think that means that you probably want something subtle in the background, and probably not white, which this implies. Hopefully it's something dark, so it goes away.
It was like a frosted grayish color.
Okay. That sounds good, I think.
This is Leaf. This is Leaf. I'm looking at from the vinyl concept is fine. I'm just not sure that this is the exact type of art that we want. I'd be really interested to see what this would look like in context with the rest of the building, and how this would work with the rest of the building, this design or another. I don't think we do want something different on every panel. I think that would make it kind of busy, but I'm not sure that from the perspective of just seeing this out of context, how it really fits in with the rest of the building. but
Okay, so,
a vinyl. Yep.
Abby,
Yes. Who is that?
this is Dan.
yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
From a procedural standpoint, could we okay the vinyl concept? And since so that they could get their building permit, and then it would be some time before they're actually to the point where they would be putting the vinyl on the windows. Could we then have the design looked at by the Arts Committee prior to formally adopting the actual design, but go ahead and approve this for a way of doing it?
Good idea.
Okay, so you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I would make that motion that we do that.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second, and I think that's okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine. I can try to set it up remotely, or maybe we'll be able to have it in person sometime this summer.
Okay, any other questions or comments now on that one? Okay, all those in favor of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously, so you work with the staff, well, anyway, work with this one.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, it's past 7:15, and I'm going to open the public hearing, and this is the petition to the Wisconsin Secretary of Transportation for airport improvement aid.
And I have a little bit of background to set up the public
Okay.
hearing, Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
Abby is loading the slides.
Sorry, I think my computer is running a little slow with everything that's going on here.
Thank you, Abby. So a little bit about, we typically, next slide, please. So every 5 or 6 years, the city, the Bureau of City to update what's called a petition resolution. It's a list of projects, potential projects that the city would like to apply for federal funding, federal and state funding over the next 5 to 6 years. And so the last time we did this was in 2014. It's been 6 years. So the Airport Commission on February 6th endorsed a list of projects unanimously. As part of the hearing process outlined by the state, the Bureau of Aeronautics requires the Plan Commission to review the record of the hearing, or hold the hearing and review the record of the hearing. The hearing doesn't have to be held by the Plan Commission, but it's just most efficient to do it this way. The Airport Commission has recommended projects. The Plan Commission is holding the hearing and then reviews the record of the hearing and makes a recommendation to the Common Council. We followed the same process that we used in 2014. Next slide. The projects, the items that are listed in the petition this year are shown on the screen. They are to prepare or undertake a wildlife site visit assessment. The next item has to do with communications at the airport between aircraft and ground communications. The third item is to acquire snow removal equipment, also purchase mowing equipment, possible purchase of the terminal building, which is currently owned by the Middleton Area Development Corporation. The runway lights are in need of repair and are not currently LED. And there's some lighting that's at the end of the runways that we wish to replace and upgrade. Always the need to, just like with the road, to repair the runway, the airport pavements with seal coat and crack fill. So that's a standing item. And then clear and maintain runway approaches. That has to do with each end of the runway, just making sure that those stay clear so that aircraft can continue to operate as they are. And then we also have drainage improvements and any necessary related work. What's not included in the petition is, I thought I had another slide in there. Did you skip ahead? Oh, well, why don't you?
This one?
No. Well, there's a slide missing now. Just go back, please. There it is, yeah. What's not included is the, any project that's being studied as part of the airport master planning process, which is currently underway. So any potential new hangar development, potential lengthening of the runway or crossing runway projects that we specifically are not including in the petition this time. And so any project that is on the list does not entail any land acquisition. What's next? There we go. So this is an example of something that the petition is intended to address. We have a tractor that is very expensive to repair and is starting to need more repairs. And so every 10 years, I believe it is, we're eligible for funding assistance to upgrade the snow removal equipment at the airport. So that is why that's on the list. Let's see what's next here.
Do you want me to go back?
Yes, please. I must have moved them around and saved it in the wrong order. Sorry about that. So this is an example of the hearing that was held in 2014. We had one person. We added a couple items based on input from the airport manager, and then there was a motion to recommend approval to the council the petition resolution with the addition of those two items. We have received some guidance from the Bureau of Aeronautics requesting or asking that the language in yellow, highlighted in yellow, should be included. They want to see that included in the petition resolution. It was included 6 years ago. It's considered boilerplate language. However, because we do not have any project related that is on the list that involves land acquisition, we have decided to not include it on our petition. And so that's what's in the resolution before you that was posted on Friday. Does not have that language highlighted in yellow. I'm just showing it here as because there has been some confusion about whether it was included or not, and it is not. Next. And this is the guidance we received from the Bureau of Aeronautics. In green, you can see that they said the language needs to stay in there. But at this point, we are recommending to the Plan Commission that the language not be included. Whether that petition is not going to be valid, I don't know that at this point, but I have wanted to share with you that this is the guidance that we've gotten from the Bureau. I think that was it for my comments. So I think, Mayor, you've already opened the hearing. So
okay, thank you, yep. Mark. So, Chair Jim Palmer, you want to speak? Anything? So the chair of the town of Springfield, Jim Palmer, is here, and he's going to speak.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to come in tonight and speak with you. I sent the mayor and the city council a letter a while back of some of the feelings that we have in the town of Springfield, and I just wanted to bring that up. I know that in your requirements in the language in the future, you might have to add the eminent domain thing, but as good neighbors, we're hoping that that doesn't have to happen. If by chance you have to add that language to it, there's no reason why we shouldn't take a look at our 20-year agreement anyway, and you can do it with my town or the town of Middleton or whoever you want. You can have a separate language. I mean, whatever you have to put in there, if it has to be in there, but as long as you and our two municipalities have an agreement that you're not going to use eminent domain, I think we'd be happy with that. So as I stated in my letter, I'm not going to take everybody's time. I mean, we're not, our citizens really don't want to see you expanding the airport much. But on the flip side, if you're willing to work with the town of Springfield on these airport issues, I've stated to the mayor in person that, you know, there are advantages to working with our communities, because I think we could do a lot to help your stormwater issues and everything else. So I just wanted to bring that up because in the future, if we have a chance to talk about stormwater issues, remember in the backside that, you know, if you're willing to work with us on the airport issues, we're willing to work with you on other issues. So I want to thank you for your time, and we should, like I said, if for some reason, Mark, in the future, if you have to add that, that's fine. our two communities can have a separate agreement that would override it just between us. So.
Well, Chair, I want to say we are good neighbors. We want to be good neighbors, and there are many issues which are common for Springfield and Middleton, and we could work together, and working together is a lot better than not. And storm water or flood water is really a big issue for Middleton because of the flood fought in August 2018, and I'm sure that we would be happy to work with. So at least I would be. So
right, and we'll probably have a chance to get together on a meeting on that sometime in the near future when the whole virus thing slows down here a little bit. So thank you again for allowing me to speak.
And absolutely, and I want to say thank you for your time and thank you for your offer. So I think working together is a lot better than not. So thank you again. Who would be the next speaker?
Am I unmuted?
Okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah, Cynthia.
This is Cynthia Richardson, Town of Middleton Board Chair. May I speak next?
Yes, Cynthia, you're on.
Excellent. So first of all, I want to say thank you very much to the City of Middleton and the city staff. There was a little bit of confusion about the resolution that, as it started out with eminent domain language in it and acquire property, and then it came out. And so I apologize for any confusion that may have caused. And I want to echo Chair Pulvermacher's comments about being a good neighbor and looking forward to continuing to work with the city cooperatively. So I'm asking that the letter that the town of Middleton submitted to the Plan Commission and the Common Council today be admitted into the public hearing record. Everybody got that by email this afternoon, hopefully. And then I have a couple of other comments. With respect to some of the airport 2020 projects, just something to think about or maybe ask a few questions. There is PAPI, and that stands for Precision Precision Approach Path Indicator. It has to do with the glide slope, and VASI, which is Visual Approach Slope Indicator. And these seem to be upgrades. And I think I heard just a few minutes ago about possible upgrades on lighting and runway items. But the Visual Approach Slope Indicator, VASI, is designed for an aircraft where the cockpit is not so high up, whereas PAPI, the Precision Approach Path Indicator, offers more glide slopes for larger airplanes with a high cockpit that may want to fly a higher glide path. So I'm just wondering if we're not tying this in any way to the master plan possibilities, why we're upgrading to the precision one. My other question, or just kind of consideration, is the City of Middleton land lease agreement with the Middleton Area Development Corp. Does not expire until December 31 of 2028. So I'm just wondering why the timing of purchase the airport the airport terminal, is on the 2020 project list. And then finally, the runway protection zone to the south, which is at Airport Road and Deming Way, and it's discussed and described on page 53 of Mead and Hunt's Chapter 3 Facility Requirements, draft July 2019 for the Master Plan Advisory Committee. And I'll just read the sentence from it. To the south, the runway 01 RPZ for runway protection zone is positioned over the intersection of Airport Road and Deming Way, in addition to the businesses located there. So I looked at the Federal Aviation Administration guidance on runway protection zones, and they say that the purpose is to protect people and property on the ground, and that the airport owner should have maximum control over the runway protection zone, and they recommend the preferred approach is by ownership of that area. And the parcel in question appears to be a vacant lot with an address of 83304 Forsythia Street. So if in the future, and that's for the current runway protection zone, I would ask that the city consider trying to purchase that property for the protection of people and property on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. So who is the next?
We have three folks that have their hands raised right now: John Halleck, Barb Bryce, and Rich Maury.
So do you know what the order was?
John, would you like to go first?
Okay, John.
Sure, I'd be glad.
John.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, the list of items that are on the list, as we looked at them, are what we consider to be kind of the basic elements to take care of the airport in the foreseeable future as it's configured now. There is the runway in lighting, and the runway lighting is not meant to be an upgrade in terms of functionality, but more of an upgrade in terms of repairing a broken system and replacing it with a more modern system. So it's not a functionality change. It's really more of a technology change, if you will. And the inclusion of the terminal building is really meant to provide a means of retaining revenue generated on the airport for the airport. And that's actually mandated in the assurances that the city signed with the FAA. So the elements that are on there, there's nothing meant to be more than taking care of the airport in an as-is position. We had a lot of debate over it. We took a lot of items out that we thought might be contentious, but we do believe this is bare bones what we really need.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
So
Next is Barb Bryce.
Okay, Barb Bryce. Barb, you're on. Barb Bryce.
Barb, it looks
Can you hear
like
us?
I don't have, yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. It's Barb and Dave Bryce.
Okay, I just want to thank you very much for taking public input to this, and you've answered quite a lot of questions already. Mr. Halleck did address the terminal building, which has something to do, I assume, with the lease that is up in 2028. So this is more of it's keeping the money within the airport, at least what I understand. Also, the wildlife site visit, really like more of an explanation about this and what the purpose of it is regarding the surrounding wetlands and whether it's conservation or the danger that wildlife poses to landing and taking off aircraft. Also, the drainage improvements that you were talking about, there's sometimes sewage smells, and there's a large amount of water occasionally that accumulates off Airport Road after rains. So that really has to be addressed, but I hope it's addressed in the context of the entire water usage in Middleton, which is the purpose of utilizing wetlands. I'm sure that if larger drainage ditches that will drain the airport may cause more problems downstream. So I guess in my conclusion is I'd recommend that unless this is really on the mayor's agenda, I would recommend postponing this until more study has been done. Thank you. Barb?
Dave and Barb, could you please state your address for the record?
It's Barb and Dave Bryce, 7329 Summit Ridge Road in Middleton.
Thank you.
Dave and Barb. Okay, so next is
Richard Maury is next.
okay, Rich Maury. Rich, you're on.
Hey, hopefully you can hear me. Just answering a couple questions. We currently have PAPI lights in place. The VASI lights are being phased out, I think, on a national level. I haven't seen any new installations of them in a great while. So really, as John mentioned, we're just trying to get something modern that when a lightning strike happens, we don't have to wait a month and a half for them to redo a circuit board for us. It's an old system. All of this is about 14 years old. currently. Other than that, that's all I had to say. Other than I having dealt with the DNR on our drainage when we did our first bit, and seeing what the airport held water-wise during our flood of last August. This, I think they know their job, they know their work. We're getting more and more water on the airport as our neighbors drainage tile their farm fields, which is natural. They want to have better fields. So currently we're good, but we can always be better. And the last flood, I believe we mentioned, did cause a little bit of washout in the area. So that should be addressed as well.
Thank you, Rich. And the next is Pam Creel, and she will be followed by Jenny Palovich. Pam Creel.
Hi, this is Pam. Can you hear me?
Can hear you, Pam.
Okay, thanks. I missed, or I didn't understand, or didn't hear John Halleck's response to the question regarding why the terminal building purchase is on the list. I just wanted to understand why that's happening now. Just to, if he could repeat his answer, or if someone else could answer that would be great.
John, do you want to answer it yourself?
Sure, I'd be more than glad to. One of the challenges that we have as an airport is ongoing funding. For all practical purposes, the airport is a closed economy. The airport funding is predominantly through entitlements that we get through the Bureau of Aeronautics, and then what we generate on the field in the form of an override on the number of gallons of gas, and also the rental of the hangar lease space. The rate of increase for the costs are much greater than the rate of increase for the revenue. So the concept was, if we could acquire the building and then be the leaseor of the building, and then take the revenue from the lease, we would then transfer it over into the airport fund, and that money would help run the airport. I fear, I'm working on a 5 and a 10-year budget projection, but I fear that the costs are going to go up faster, excuse me, than the revenues, and in which case the city would have to fund that. And I'm trying to, we're collectively trying to find a way to make sure the airport is self-funding and doesn't take any money actually from the city.
I see. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And do you have any further questions, or you want to add any or say anything more?
I'm sorry, I don't have any other questions. That was my question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jenny, you're on.
Hello. I have a question about, with the land acquisition and eminent domain language taken out of the resolution, I'm wondering, with the items on the list, what effects do you expect that implementing these might have on wildlife and on adjacent properties? For example, the lighting, what effects it might have, if that will change anything with new technology, and clearing and maintaining the runway approaches, what effects that might have on wildlife and adjacent properties. Thank you. That's the only question I have.
Does anybody want to answer that?
Sure, I can give it a try. So the wildlife language is, I think, something that we've included in previous petitions. It's also one of those boilerplate items that the Bureau encourages us to keep on the list. I defer to Rich Morey for a description about wildlife at the airport. Drainage is also one of those things that we, as Rich referenced, we had a flood a couple years ago that did do some damage, a little bit of damage to the creek corridor. And we have trees that are invasive and are growing, willows, et cetera, that are in the creek corridor that are impeding flood events and need to be addressed. So a lot of this is just meant to be, allow us to qualify for funding to do the maintenance that's necessary to keep the airport functioning as designed and improve and address stormwater issues. We don't want to see flooding back up into lands to the north. And I'm trying to remember what the other issue was that was raised. Wildlife, drainage. I hadn't heard about sewage smells before, so I'm not quite sure. That must be a reference to stagnant water at the airport, I would guess. And John Halleck and Rich Morey have already addressed the other issues. So most of these items.
Clearly maintaining the runway approaches. I don't know if that was just addressed by the trees.
Thank you. That's the one I meant to address. Sorry. So yeah, there are some trees in the vicinity of the airport that every once in a while are growing into what's called the approach surface. We actually have a few of those identified currently, which I'm working on with adjoining property owners, that once the trees encroach this approach surface, it affects safety clearances defined by the FAA. And so that is also considered a standing item for these petitions, just so that we can continue to do the maintenance we need. We have grant assurances to the FAA that we are obligated to take all the steps that we need to maintain the airport in a safe operational condition. So this isn't intended to be anything that's new that expands the footprint of the airport. It's just to maintain what's currently there.
Jackie, other questions, or you are satisfied with this? Okay, anybody else who wants to speak?
Rich Morey, did you have your hand raised again?
I did. I was just going to address the wildlife issues and the smell. The smell is directly proportional to how much manure has been spread and where the wind is on the surrounding farmland. I don't believe we have any real sewage issues out here. I'm sure we don't. And then the wildlife assessment is something that the federal FAA has been wanting and then not funding for a while for various small airports. They simply want someone who knows wildlife to look at the airport to try to minimize any potential negative interaction between larger birds or animals and aircraft. So it's a safety issue. For instance, if they see there's there's a pond located on the airport, they might say, well, we need to figure out a way to move the pond or to mitigate to keep the geese and the ducks off of it. Similar things. So it's just an assessment. They will make their recommendations, which at that point the city can deal with as they wish. But that's something they've been wanting to do for well over a decade, and it's funny that sometimes they push it and then they stop it. At the moment, it's just one of the things that's on the list, and we haven't had any real immediate demand to do it, but it should be there.
Thank you, Rich. Anyone else who wants to speak at this time or have any questions?
Is there anybody on the telephone who would like to speak?
Yes.
Please identify yourself and give your address and your own.
You betcha. Steve Ziegler, 4797 Capitol View Road, Middleton, Wisconsin. And I'm here to express my disappointment that a public hearing of this importance and this contentious of an issue of the airport is being held at a time when the public actually for a public hearing is very hard with which to respond and coordinate with. On behalf of the city, I will say that taking off the issues of land acquisition, which has nothing to do with the protocol with which The Airport Commission is petitioning the FAA for project at this point. Was greatly appreciated by myself and my neighbors, since our lands will be the lands taken under eminent domain if the airport increases. So I want to thank you for that. I am impressed that it took a hard fought battle and much determination by many people, and the town of Springfield and the town of Middleton chairmans. I want to thank them for that. Please take this seriously. I think the idea of the waterfowl and the wildlife assessment at this point is far premature, and it's not so much a matter of what the and waterfowl do to the airplanes as what the airplanes do to the biosphere and the bioregion and animals that live in the floodplain of Glacial Lake Middleton. Please consider moving this to a more appropriate issue and a different time. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Great input. We do want to be great neighbors. Anyone else who is on the telephone who wants to speak?
For the record, I don't know. Abby,
Yeah, could you list the, Mark Opus was going to list the names of the people we did not yet collect addresses from, so that we can include that in the minutes.
Well, Steve just gave his, we have that, but we didn't get Jenny or Pat Camp Krill. I don't have those.
Pat, could you please give your address?
I live in the town of Springfield. Can you say that? This is Pam Krill, I'm sorry.
Okay. Is that enough, Mark? Okay, how about Jenny?
I live in the town of Middleton.
That's it, I think.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else who wants to speak at this time, either on the telephone or video? Okay, I'm going to close that part of the meeting, and we are going to go to item number 3, petition to the Wisconsin Secretary of Transportation for airport improvement aid. And we just had a public hearing, so we don't need a motion to approve, right?
Well, so you've all heard the input at the hearing, and as part of the input, I was actually going to say what Chair Richardson said, which is we received a letter from the town of Middleton, which is part of the record, as well as an email from Fred Klansnick, a City of Middleton resident, who resides at 3315 Glacier Ridge Road. And you received those earlier. So after reviewing the record of the hearing, it would be appropriate for the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to the Common Council, if you are so inclined.
Okay, so with those comments and since there isn't, that would be part of the record as well as the email communication with Professor Klasnick. Okay,
Mayor?
so need a motion? Yeah.
This is Kurt. I move to accept the recommendation, the unanimous recommendation of the Airport Commission, and forward on to council with a positive recommendation.
I'll second that.
Second.
So this does not include the language of the land acquisition, right? This includes that one.
The list is specific. The hearing notice that went out, subject to the hearing, is the project list that was recommended by the Airport Commission. So it's the list that was in the hearing notice and is listed as number 2 in the petition resolution. That language that had never listed land use acquisition. What's confusing for people is that the state has some boilerplate language in their petition resolution that is apparently boilerplate that they require to be included in all petitions, but that's nothing that the city ever petitioned for. I think that is a misunderstanding that people have. The city has never, at the Airport Commission meeting on February 6th, there was a discussion about possibly petitioning for to create a land use zoning ordinance. And that was something that was also recommended by the Bureau, but the Airport Commission specifically removed that from the list of petitioned items. And so that language that was adopted by the Airport Commission never included any reference to land use or expansion related projects. And so what's before you tonight is the recommendation of the Airport Commission with the list of projects that were listed number 2 in the resolution.
Okay, is that clear to everyone? Any other questions or comments from the Plan Commission members? Any questions or comments from Plan Commission members? The motion is to approve the petition to the Wisconsin Secretary of Transportation for airport improvement aid.
Do you want a roll call vote?
Actually, Mayor, the motion is to recommend approval to the council, not to approve.
Okay, recommend, all right, to the council. So, do we want to do roll call or do we want to, well, let's see that if there's anyone opposing. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed to the motion? So motion is approved unanimously. Thank you to everyone for your input, and we move on to the next item. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. So we are on to item number 4, and that is the general implementation plan for Pleasant View Park Apartments, Greenway Center, 1515 Pleasant View Road, lots 3 and 4.
Okay, so it looks like, Dan, do you have your hand raised?
I do. I'm recusing myself from discussion or voting on these last 2 items.
Thank you. Okay, so on the Pleasant View Park development, you all will have to bear with me for a little bit because I have a few updates from meetings that have just taken place in the last couple of days. I also, after I provide the update from staff, I'll be turning it over to Joe Lee, who's on the call, and he'll be going through his slides and his presentation.
Okay.
So this is a proposal for a $60 million development that includes 220 units of housing. I think most of the commissioners are familiar with this project. It's been to a lot of committees. You can see on the screen here, I think it's probably been at a dozen or more different committees in the city. This project, as I mentioned, provides 220 units of housing, and we know that we have a pretty significant shortage of housing in Middleton. We also have incurred a lot of concerns about infill development. Those projects a lot of times are met with a significant amount of neighborhood opposition. This is a greenfield site. We have had quite a significant amount of neighborhood opposition and concerns from the condominium owners, in particular to the south of this project, and there have been a couple of neighborhood meetings that have been held with the condos. A couple of just big picture points to make regarding this development. In terms of best practices in planning, it is quite favorable to locate housing proximate to jobs. And this site is just north of just south of our largest employer in the city, and that's PPD, which employs over 1,000 people, I believe, at their Research Way location. We have quite a few PPD representatives on the call as well this evening. Another item that I would note here is that the site is about 50% green space, and what is more typical in this type of development would be significant less percentage of green space. And the reason that this developer is able to preserve about half of the land in green space is because the parking is going underground. And so they're able to build up rather than build out. So there are a lot of positive things to note about this project. I mentioned that this has been reviewed by over a dozen different committee meetings. I think that what has happened is that this project has really gone way beyond what is typical for GIP or General Implementation Plan zoning review. And the reason for that is that this project is really complex, and there are some significant concerns from people in the neighborhood, and we want to make sure we're being sensitive to that. For any commissioners who want it to have it handy, I have created this document that is just pulled directly from our zoning ordinance, and it goes over the procedure for General Implementation Plan review, and also the criteria that the commission should use when making a decision or a recommendation for GIP zoning. And then lastly, the effect of PDD GIP zoning. Again, Planned Development Districts, or PDDs, have two phases of zoning. The first is the General Implementation Plan, or GIP. The second is the SIP, Specific Implementation Plan. If the City Council approves the GIP and an SIP is submitted that is reasonably consistent with the GIP and meets all of the criteria that was placed on the GIP zoning, then the council must approve the SIP at that point. So there are a couple of major issues that have been raised, and I want to just point out a couple of them. One is the route that the sanitary sewer will take through the Conservancy land. CLC, or Conservancy Lands Commission, met and reviewed the two options that were being proposed by the developer, and they deferred action, and this will be back on the CLC agenda this Thursday. Mark Wegner, who is the Assistant Director of Public Lands for the city, has reviewed a report that the developer has provided. The report was done by Stantec along with Forester Bruce Allison about the impact to the Conservancy land by routing the sanitary sewer through this piece of property. And my understanding is that by following the route of the existing bike path, there will be 0 to 3 trees that are impacted by the construction. Those 3 trees that may be impacted are already impacted by the construction of the bike path. So based on the report and his initial review, what I learned from Mark Wegner today is that his biggest outstanding concern is whether the path can support the weight of the construction trucks that will need to use it for access. And that will be discussed at CLC on Thursday. I personally think that it's something that could be handled at the SIP phase at this point. The other major issue that was raised at the March 10th Plan Commission meeting is concerns over any impacts to PPD. And I was able to get on a call with 4 representatives of PPD and 4 representatives of the development team yesterday. So that was John Jennison, Bob Verdinick, Darren Jansky from PPD, along with Rick Gilbertson from Strang. And then from the development team, Jim Stoppel, Joe Lee, Wade Weiss, and Keith Missufton, who is with Stevens Construction. John had raised 3 concerns about the Pleasant View Park development at the March 10th meeting: traffic, solar access, and blasting. The focus of the discussion that we had yesterday was around items 1 and 3, traffic and blasting, and then an added concern related to stormwater management. I believe that PPD's concerns about solar access have largely been satisfied, but they still have some really significant concerns, especially about blasting and how it might impact their business. In terms of traffic, there is a traffic impact analysis that is underway currently. We have some preliminary estimates of additional traffic that will be generated by this development. It's really minimal in the scope of things. It's I believe it's about 90 trips in the AM peak hour coming from this development, and about 50 trips in the PM peak hour. And that's, you know, modeled using our existing conditions for traffic, and then estimates for what this new development will generate. We will wait to get the full traffic impact analysis, and that will be provided to PPD and anyone else who wants a chance to review the TIA. The other issue is the blasting. In particular, PPD has expressed concerns about how the blasting and the vibrations may impact their very sensitive instruments. Keith, who was on the call from Stevens Construction, provided some information about how the blasting is less severe compared to what happens at the quarry. He compared it to a pack of firecrackers and said it would occur 2 to 3 times per day, 10 seconds each time for a period of about 30 days. The quarry blasting is further away from PPD's facility, however. They are also worried that the higher elevation of the site will cause more vibration. This facility produces over $1 million in revenue per day. Sometimes their instruments are set when employees arrive at work in the morning and they run through the evening. Sometimes they run on the weekends as well. It seemed like it might be possible to work out a solution between the two parties, which would limit blasting to particular hours of the day, perhaps morning beginning at 7 a.m. and only lasting for hours and weekends. But I will say that I heard back from one of the PPD representatives today, and they said, you know, that would also cost them as well, because they would have to schedule around the blasting as it was occurring. They, PPD noted that some of their equipment has a USP rating, which could help Stevens Construction determine if the blasting is going to cause problems with their instruments. We also talked about having a trial blast, which could be done and would be able to simulate what PPD may experience throughout construction. It would need to be scheduled in advance. However, I also know that PPD has some concerns about whether a trial blast will adequately be able to simulate what will happen during construction as you get to a deeper level of bedrock. There was also discussion about spalling on the existing rock wall and any additional spalling that may occur during construction. Even a small rock coming off of that rock wall could cause serious damage to vehicles or to human beings. There is mesh that exists on the wall now, and there's also a 5-foot trench at the bottom. And the Pleasant View Park developers would be willing to enhance the mesh and also clear the trench after construction. The last item that was brought up during the call was concerns that PPD has over stormwater management, because they had noticed some erosion after the August 2018 floods. And I've sent over the stormwater management plans that Water Resources Commission approved, and they are going to be able to review those and provide any comments that they have. I think the major concern coming from PPD right now is they have asked whether indemnification during construction activities would be provided by the developer. And specifically, they wanted an insurance policy where PPD is named as an additional insured party should they have any impacts beyond just impacts to their building, but impacts to their operations. They wanted to be named as an additional insured party. I worked with our city attorney on that, because they specifically asked that this be included as a contingency on any rezoning. And our assistant city attorney got back to me, Matt Fleming, and he said that he didn't think that requiring indemnification as a condition of zoning would be appropriate. He also didn't think it would be necessary because of SPS 307, which regulates blasting activities. And he gave me some language, and I'm going to send it over to PPD as well so that they'll have it. But specifically, there's some language in those statutes that say blasting shall be conducted so as to prevent injury and unreasonable annoyance to persons and damage to public or private property outside the controlled blasting site area. And there's some additional language as well. PPD has stated that while they understand that the statutes may provide protection against damages, the process by which those damages must be claimed could be time-consuming and also expensive. PPD is going to be reaching out to the developer of this project and issuing them a notice of sensitivity of their lab equipment. Let's see here. I also had a call today, and that was with, before I go into that, I also just want to mention that one of the things that our staff realized after the call with PPD is that we need to schedule another meeting with PPD to talk with them about the Pleasant View Road reconstruction project, which also includes blasting. And we need to make sure that we're ready and prepared to be able to accommodate them during that construction project as well. So we're going to work on setting that up with Strand. I had a call today also with representatives of Capital IRA, and they own the PPD property. PPD leases the building from Capital IRA. And at the end of the call with Capital IRA, they requested that these 3 additional items be added as contingencies of any GIP zoning. So the city's geotechnical consultant shall review and approve the developer's slope stability study for the cliff, including during and after construction. The city's consultant shall review and approve the developer's bluff reinforcement recommendations for conditions during and after construction, and the developer shall provide blasting plans to IRA and PPD for review prior to SIT approval. So again, I'm happy to pull those GIP conditions back up. I am a little uncomfortable how far this project has gotten without any action taken at this point by the Plan Commission, aside from referring it out to committees. I think I can't remember when they initially came, but they came for concept review, and instead of granting concept review, I think the commission was wanting to get additional feedback from other committees, and so we've got that feedback now, and I think the project has gotten kind of far ahead of what we typically would require for GIP. So now, assuming we haven't lost Joe Lee, nope. I would be happy to turn it over to you, Joe. Abby, if I could get it, Jim Stoppel, if I could give just a little introduction first, and then we'll turn it over to Joe. Sure. Perfect. Good evening. My name is Jim Stoppel with Madison Property Management. MPM's been in the property management business since 1988 and had the privilege of working with Jeff Straubel on this project for the last 2 years. I want to thank the members of the Plan Commission for the opportunity to introduce the project again in hopes that we can achieve final approval tonight, subject to the contingencies listed by staff report. Also want to thank you for your dedication of time to the Plan Commission during these most difficult times. Jeff has been working with the city of Middleton since the early 1980s. He developed the Trade Center, 3 hotels, Middleton Station, and many other projects in Middleton over the last 40 years. I think the Pleasant View project that's before you tonight is going to be his very best project of all. At our December 10, 2019 Plan Commission meeting, we did provide you with a detailed overview of the project. For tonight's meeting,
The development team will try to focus on the remaining issues and resolutions that have developed since our December meeting. Jeff has put together one of the best development teams possible and has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to a point where he feels he's ready to provide the city of Middleton with what the team considers a stellar project for this unique parcel. This evening, we'll be hearing from architect Joseph Lee of JLA Architects, who will provide you with an overview of the project. Then engineer Wade Weiss of Weiser Engineering will provide you with more detailed analysis of the engineering facets of the project and how our work will significantly reduce the stormwater runoff that goes to our neighbors to the south. Then Professor Bruce Allison will provide you with a very detailed analysis of the Conservancy land adjacent to the project, how this project interacts with the Conservancy, and the contribution Jeff will be making to revitalize the health of the Conservancy. And then Keith from Stevens Construction, who will be the general contractor for the project, will provide you with the efforts his team will take to minimize any disruption to our neighbors during construction. This will include minimizing any disruption that can be caused by rock blasting and excavation. I think we will be working in tandem with the city of Middleton on the blasting issue to be sure that we get our blast size and frequency to an accurate level. Middleton will need to do the same, need the same information when they do the blasting necessary for reconstruction of Pleasant View Road. Stevens Construction has constructed 2 high-rise projects for me in the past within 20 feet of my neighbors' buildings and never had a single complaint from our neighbors during the construction projects. I can assume Stevens will take every step necessary to exceed the expectations of the neighbors in this project. Earlier in the discussion, when you were talking about the airport and the town of Middleton, and everyone was talking about good neighbor and cooperating with your neighbor, I hope the same work with your neighbor applies to our project from all the neighbors that we have. I assure you we will do our very best to be a good neighbor to our neighbors. Tonight, we may not have all the answers yet, but we have been working diligently and closely with staff to try to provide Plan Commission approval tonight, subject to our fulfillment of the contingencies that will be listed in the staff report. Our plan is to start construction late summer 2020 and be ready for occupancy in early summer 2022. As a team, we look forward to answering any questions any of you may have later. And thank you so much for your time. With that, I'll turn it back over to Joe.
Great, thanks, Jim. Can everybody hear me? Abby,
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I know sometimes I have some technical difficulties here. Thanks, Abby, for that good introduction. You made my presentation a little bit shorter with your review of what's happened over the past few days. I do want to just emphasize that we've been part of this team for over a year now, and we've been working closely as a team, not just internally amongst ourselves, but with the city, various city departments. As Abby mentioned, a lot of committees. We've had neighborhood meetings, and all along that path, we've worked to address all the issues that have been brought up, and we feel we've been doing that successfully. And we are confident that we can do so with the few remaining items that are outstanding and that we need to provide further detail on. In that year, because of all of the concerns, because of the complexity of the projects and the concerns that have been raised, Abby is correct. We have gone further than typically we would to this point on a project. You'll be seeing some civil engineering work that Wade and his team have been doing, and they've done a heck of a lot of work up to this point addressing concerns on the engineering side. We've done a heck of a lot of work on the architectural and structural engineering side. Our client is doing his due diligence to make sure this is a real project. Stevens Construction has a bid set in hand. We're getting some detailed cost estimates as we speak, so that we are confident that this is a successful project moving forward. I'm going to share my screen here for a little bit. I think a lot of what I'm going to show is a little bit of a review, but we've refined it quite a bit. You might not be able to tell that in just quick glances of the drawings that I present here, but if you dive deeper in to our submittal, you'll see that we've progressed our designs quite a bit. So Let me just share the screen. Is that okay, Abby?
Yeah, I stopped sharing mine, so I think you should be able to share yours. Do you see that? Okay.
All right. Can everybody see?
Yeah, we see it.
Oh, I just have to figure out. How to get to that point where I can see it. There we go. So does everybody see the aerial view there still?
We do.
Okay, thank you. So as you all know, and can you see my mouse arrow moving around?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. As everybody knows the site, this is the aerial site. We're on right across Pleasant View from the golf course on the northeastern corner of the golf course, just south of the PPD operations. So as you can see here, this hasn't really changed. The concept of the project has not changed since we were first in front of you. This is a 209 unit development, high-end apartments with associated common space. As Abby did note, part of the reasoning for the shape and makeup of the site development is to maintain some green space on the site. So as you can see, there's considerable green space, up to 50% with, we've maintained 3 levels of underground parking, all accessed from the northeast side of the building. We do still have our access point on the northern part of the parcel, the northwestern part of the parcel. That is really the only feasible spot to access the parcel from the new designed Pleasant View Road with the grades and everything. This is really the only spot we can access the site vehicularly because there's a lot of grade that gets made up here. As you can see, the bike path and trail is maintained here. There's a little bit of reconstruction of it or rerouting of it here as we cross the new Pleasant View Road, but it will be maintained on our property here, as you can see. It is a 14-story building still. As I said before, 209 units. We are under the elevation of the adjacent communications tower. I should have pointed that out, which is right here. We have to maintain a height under that tower. So this dash line here is the height of that tower. And we are going to remain up to 6 feet below that height of that tower. You can see here on this cross section, the 3 levels of parking. There's 2 full levels and 1 half level on the lowest level of parking. I'll fly through these, but you can see these are just an example of how far we have progressed the design documents here in the bid documents. This is the lowest level of parking. We have 2 full levels of parking. This is the middle level and the upper level. All of the service and refuse needs will be accommodated inside the building, so there will be none of the service and refuse and that kind of thing outside of the building. That'll all be inside. Above that, we do have an occupied roof deck. We're still in the process of designing that specifically, but it will be a mix of hardscape and landscape amenity space for the residents. We also do have a pool element here. And then in the first floor program, we have an abundance of common space, such as a leasing office, fitness center, yoga room, and a poolside lounge as well. As we move up the building, on the 2nd through 13th floor, we do have multifamily units ranging from small 1-bedrooms up to 3-bedroom units. So these are the different floors. They do step back a couple times as we go up at the 11th floor, and then again at the 14th floor. And on the 14th floor, we do have some premium units with some walkout private roof decks, but we also have significant common space amenities up on that 14th floor as well, with outdoor space to take advantage of some great views up there. Again, we do on the 14th floor also have some mechanical space, so that will be all internal to the building as well. As we look at the exterior elevations, again, these have not significantly changed since you saw in the conceptual stage. We are still have the same aesthetic, and we've just refined it a little bit. The brownish material here that you'll see is masonry. The grayish and the creamish material will be a combination of either metal panel system or a high quality cementitious panel siding material such as Nichiha. We do have larger windows on each of the units to maximize the amount of natural light that comes into the units, as well as accentuate the fantastic views that we know will be a great selling point of this project. Again, a couple more views. You can see how the grade will drop off. This is along the back side. The grade will drop off here on this access road to get down to the 3rd level of parking. It does come back up as you go around the north side of the building as well. We do have a few renderings here we can show you to give you an idea 3-dimensionally what this will be. So this is an idea of how this building would look from the front of the building. You can see there in the background the new Pleasant View Drive and conceptual overpass of that bike trail there. But this would be the main building entry. From the rear, you can see how our common amenity space here on the lower left-hand corner here, the indoor or the pool, and with the indoor clubroom functions would be along here. And then we still have not finalized the design of this portion, but this will be a mixture of hardscape and landscape amenities. Again, another view from the front, ground view perspective. And from the rear, ground view perspective. Some things that have come up, and I believe this body has seen most of these, so I'll go through quickly. I can always come back if you guys want to see some things in more detail, but some views to our project from the surrounding areas were something that we wanted to provide, and we were asked to provide from our various meetings. So we did put together 8 different views. The first one here is from Market Street, right in front of the multifamily development there, Market West Apartments. You can see that the building pops up above the bluff line a little bit above the trees. The second one will be here in Greenway Station in the parking lot. Again, you guys have seen this, so I'm not going to spend too much time in the interest of time. The next one will be at Deming Way and Greenway Boulevard. You can see here the building in the background, how that pops up a little bit above the trees. As we travel west on Greenway, up the hill a little bit, that's the view of the building. Even further yet on view 5 here, up Greenway. You can see that to the left here, as you get closer to the building and up the hill, your perspective of the building is less. So the closer you get, the more the building gets covered by the trees in front of them. View 6. Again, these were taken in late October, I believe. So so there's no leaves or very little leaves on the trees, and still the building's quite obscured. View 7, I believe, is a view that the Plan Commission asked for here at the intersection of Greenway Boulevard and Pleasant View. So as you can look up there, obviously this road will be different when it's all constructed, but you can see the building there popping out from the trees a little bit. And on the left here, you can see that communication tower. That's the height of which we need to stay under. This last one, or second to the last one, is one of the committees we went to was the Pleasant View Golf Course committee, and we wanted to demonstrate to them the impact of the views from their clubhouse onto the Capitol. So this red arrow represents a direct view to the Capitol from their clubhouse. So you can see our building is nowhere near in that view. And here is that view from their patio. You can see the communication tower right here popping up by that tree. The lake views, the extent of the lake view from the left here all the way to the right until it gets obscured by landscape. And then the Capitol way off to the right there, you can see there the dome in this view. So as we insert our building, you can see that the great views are not impeded from our, getting a little feedback, so sorry if I sound a little disconnected. The great views are not impeded by our building. Another view that we wanted to show is from Research Way, Research Drive here. So I don't believe you have seen this one, but this is the view there currently. So we have PPD here. You can see the cliff here, for lack of a better term, or the big increase in grade. You can see where that the line of that cliff is if you look closely, and then the trees above it, and then our building there in the background. Shadow study, it was something that Abby said that she thought was pretty well resolved, and we do too. We just wanted to make sure that you knew we did our due diligence in this regard. So this was a concern of PPD, and we wanted to show them both in summer solstice and winter solstice the effect of this new development. So this first slide is summer solstice, June 21st, and these 4 images below on the bottom part are the shade or shadow impact of the existing site on PPD. So you can see 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m. Summer solstice. There's really not much shade or shadow to speak of on PPD, with the exception of early evening. They'll get a little bit on the western side of their building. The top 4 images are including our building. You can see here, and how our shadows will impact their site in the summer solstice. So as you can see, again, they're in the summer months, summer solstice, our building has no impact whatsoever on the PPD building. Winter solstice, we did the same exercise, and as you can see, the 4 images on the bottom here are without our building in the project. So you can see the shadow impact of the current site conditions. So once you get into mid or late afternoon, PPD is fairly much in shade by existing conditions. And then with our building on the top 4 images, you can see we do have a minor impact from, I'd say, 11 o'clock through early afternoon, but not much more than the existing conditions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Wade. He can go over some of the civil engineering efforts that he and his team have been tackling here. And I'm not sure, Wade, I can relinquish power here over the slideshow. So if you want to tell me where you want to go, I can certainly get you there.
Sure. You can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to echo what Joe and Jim had stated, that you know, for quite some time now we have been involved with this project from a civil engineering perspective, certainly in more detail than most projects at the GIP level. So I'll give a brief overview, you know, the hot topic items when it comes to the civil engineering portion of the project. And if there is more detail needed, would be happy to discuss in further detail those items. Joe, if you want to just, yeah, that graphic will be good to start. First, from the access perspective, I think Abby and Joe both already hit on the locations, both in a permanent location, northwest corner of the site, and in a temporary condition, closer to the southwest corner of the site. Those access locations, grades, site distance views, all of those kind of good things have been worked out with city representatives as well as with Strand Associates working on the design of Pleasant View Road. Joe, if you want to go to like sheet C200, kind of shows the grading plan, if you will. Yeah, that'll work. So I'm going to jump right into stormwater. That's usually the topic of most discussion for projects that are requesting a rezone and further discussion. This project, we originally started, the majority of the site drains to the east through the Conservancy land. And we put together a full grading plan and a stormwater management plan that suggested continuing this same watershed flow and brought it in front of the Water Resources Commission with not only an easterly discharge of our stormwater, but with also consideration to the water resources to provide fee in lieu of payment for infiltration due to the proximity of bedrock being 6 to 10 feet below grade. At that water resources meeting, we heard them loud and clear, and they asked us to basically go back to the drawing board, take a look and analyze on-site infiltration potential as opposed to the request for fee in lieu of, to look at an ultimate storm sewer discharge or stormwater runoff discharge for the site in the northwest corner to better contain erosion control matters and sediment control and discharge to a future storm sewer system in Pleasant View Road and when that comes online. And then also to take a look at what the bedrock really was out there and what is truly bedrock and what is fractured bedrock and the potential impact and viability of infiltration. So with that, we went back to the drawing board and created a complete flip of the site. We have all of our stormwater, and what's presented in front of you here now, we have all of our stormwater discharging to a storm sewer system that's located in the northwest corner of the site. The stormwater that discharges in that location will collect nearly all of the impervious surface from the site. We also heard at a neighborhood meeting certain concern for stormwater runoff heading southeasterly. So it's very noteworthy that because of the rooftop runoff and our ability to control that runoff, the watershed area contributing stormwater runoff to that southeast corner has been decreased in area from 1.13 acres as it exists now to just under a half an acre in this proposed development. So significantly less land and stormwater runoff generated by that land discharges to the southeast condition. And again, it's noteworthy that the impervious surface all goes to the northwest in this application. So we really heard the neighborhood in that regard. We listened to water resources. We took a look at that northwest discharge and focused in on what the best location would be for stormwater to discharge from the site. Furthermore, with that revisit of the site stormwater management plan, we took a look at the infiltration for the site, and we are not requesting fees in lieu of for infiltration with the current design. And after lengthy discussion at the Water Resources meeting, a suggested edit was proposed to us that we consider providing for a liner in one of our two main stormwater facilities in the northeast corner there, Joe, if you're just off that northeast corner of the building. So, yep, in that one. Water Resources suggested maybe we should further consider lining that facility and paying some infiltration fees in lieu of to prevent groundwater flow heading easterly through the Conservancy. And we're happy to do that. The developer's happy to consider both options, and we're happy to throw that liner in that application. With that, we also had at the Water Resources meeting, we had a groundwater expert, if you will, Steve Gatfield from EOR, Enos Oliver Resources. He presented his opinion on groundwater flowing through the bedrock conditions that are present on site in more of a vertical fashion than a horizontal fashion. And that was a big point of discussion at the Water Resources meeting, was how when water that's infiltrated hits the bedrock, where's it going to go from there? Is it going to go straight down? Is it going to migrate horizontally? That was a point of discussion. I think the main takeaway from that discussion, though, is, and even after the Water Resources meeting was over and further dialogue with city engineering is still under consideration, perhaps the other stormwater facility could have a liner as well. And we could go back to paying fees in lieu of for infiltration for this whole site to further negate or mitigate, if you will, any concerns with groundwater flow. So the takeaway, I think, is that the options are there. We've provided for both a site that can infiltrate, and we're happy to pay fees in lieu of as we finalize this design. So that was the stormwater summary for the project. And again, I'll move on to the utilities, but if we need to revisit anything, I'm happy to do so. Utility services for the site, they are unique and a challenge in and of themselves. If you go to C300 there, Joe, I'll start with the easy one. Water, there is a hydrant in the very southwest corner of our site where water service would be provided for and connect to the building.
Wade?
Yes.
You're moving on. Do you want me to ask my question about the stormwater?
Sure, I'm happy either way. Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like you've done a great deal on this regarding stormwater, and I appreciate that. But just trying to follow you, the southeast corner of the project, if you could go back to the drawing C200, whatever it was, with the topography on it. Yeah. The southeast corner, well, why don't you get the full one, C200 maybe. Anyway, the southeast corner I saw on one of these plans when I got the detail enlarged is about 1,032. That's a lot lower than the west or the northwest corner, which tends to be about 1,050 or so. That detention basin on the northwest corner is 1,052 on the base of it. So the southeast corner is 20 feet lower. And then if you go to the northeast detention basin that's shown here that we're just chatting about fees in lieu of, that one's the lowest of all at 1021. So that's 30 feet lower than the northwest corner. And so I'm just wondering how you get all this water that's down at the south corner at 1030 and the northeast corner at 1021 up to the detention basin or the other connections that we're talking about, the storm sewer along Pleasant View that's up somewhere in the 1050 range, I gather from what I've been hearing and reading and listening to you talk about.
Very good question. Yep. And you're correct. This is a great point for me to give more of an overview. Probably the easiest way to think about this, in that northeast corner, that is where the drive lanes are diving down to get to that third level of parking.
Right.
And so what we're doing is we're catching the water where and when we can as we go closer to that third level parking in that northeast fire retention basin. And that is at an elevation that's significantly lower than even the second floor parking and certainly that northwest corner discharge of the site. So from that basin, what happens is, think of it, that northeast basin ties into that same trench drain system that is right outside the building that collects stormwater runoff, and it enters the mechanical systems of the building and is actually pumped up to a discharge point in that northwest basin. So it's a mechanical pump discharge from that northeast basin to get to that grade that we need to be at in that northwest corner.
Awesome, that's great. How about the south end then at 1030? What the flow, what happens to the flow of that? Does that move to the northeast and get added to this flow into the underground storm drain?
So if I understand your question correctly, in that south portion, if you see the building footprint represents the watershed boundary. So everything north of the building footprint and the rooftop itself certainly gets to that northwest corner.
Okay.
As you go maybe a quarter of the way along that fire lane on the back side, there's a point where the water goes from going south to going down that entrance drive to that pump system that I just described. Yep, right in there, Joe, right back where you were there. Around the corner even a little bit more the other way. Yep, so that water in that south side in that location, that is the water that sheet flows off, consistent with existing sheet flow conditions today, flows over the path and goes to the south. So the portion of, and I want to make sure it's clear too, the different hatching, if you will, on that fire lane is that is a porous pavement, paver-like system only to be used because of the fire lane needs for the project, not typical vehicular traffic. So the area is decreased and the surface is porous or green space that flows south.
Yeah, but porous pavement isn't better than ground that's there right now. Plus, over time, we've learned in Middleton that porous pavement accumulates dirt and crud and ceases to be porous.
Yeah, and we, so as it relates to the material type of that fire lane, we are open to further dialogue, discussion, certainly design input on our end to provide for the best material there. I think the main takeaway though is that the discharge to the south went from 1.13 acres to 0.48 acres. So we decreased the area specific because of that issue. We actually set that 0.48 acres at the runoff rate control rates that you see today. That's how we set the areas that flow south.
Yeah, that was impressive to see that chart of yours that shows that what is flowing there today in low storms is going to be increased by this whole complex. But in the 100-year storm, it's going to be decreased, which logic doesn't compute to me, but because it seems like when it's a heavier flow, less will get absorbed. So I'm not sure why it would be lower than today's rate from the 1.12 acres.
So the rationale, the reason behind that is you're certainly first of all, we would always look for the more damage causing rain events to be detained at a higher rate. So we want to make sure, you know, when we get to the 5-year event, you know, we get to the 10-year event where we're talking 4 inches of rain, that's when people are concerned or talking about flooding issues. So we made sure, you know, above that 5-year event, we made sure that that runoff rate was less. The reason it's nominally, I mean, I say that with a grain of salt because it's, you know, we're talking about 0.2, 0.3 CFS more increase in the 1 to 2 year storm events, that 1-2 inch rain events, is because our model is conservative and we want to be forthright in this. We want to make sure we aren't taking credit necessarily for the porous pavement or paver system of the fire lane, but more importantly, we're cognizant of the fact that after construction, there's a lot of compaction that happens. So for those low flow storm events, we're taking into account that that ground is more compact and keeping that in mind, and that's the reason some of the low flow events are nominally more.
Got it. Thank you, Wade. It's still difficult to understand, you know, and it's all speculation as to whether it will be higher or lower. I just worry about the fact that we haven't done anything down there. But as you say, you're calculating that it's going to be lower in the most difficult time. So maybe in the future, when they have the next 500-year flood, they will have to rethink it all.
Any other questions relative to stormwater before I move on to utilities?
Nope.
Wade, this is Mike Slavish. So the drain field that you're going to do on kind of that northwest corner, what is kind of the invert elevation of that drain field?
If you go back, Joe.
Kind of as a follow-up to Kitty's questions about, you know, the elevation of those two low points there on the south side, south and southeast corner.
So the very northwest facility has a bottom infiltration elevation of 1034.
Okay. So you're lifting
And
that water about 4 feet from the southeast corner and obviously over 10 feet in the northeast corner. Is that correct?
Yeah, the northeast corner is 1021.
Okay.
So we're 13 feet of elevation change there. But I should caution too that, remember, it flows out of that northeast basin, it goes into a trench drain, it gets into the mechanical pump system. So it's at and below that bottom level parking of 1018. So, you know, it's 16, 18 feet of change from the northeast corner to that northwest corner.
So that pump capacity is rated at what kind of storm event then?
So great question. We are working with the interior plumbing designer to provide for a 100-year flow pump capacity for that system.
Okay.
I think it's noteworthy though that if the pump fails, right, let's talk about catastrophic issues. If that pump fails, where does that water go? It fills the basement, the third floor of parking on this development, and creates a bathtub. There's not necessarily, you know, all of a sudden the pump fails and we have water going to the south. That is not an issue. So there are backups and things that we are considering, dual pumps, all of those kind of good things. But certainly the risk lies with the developer.
Okay. Appreciate that clarification.
Any other questions for the stormwater? Thank you.
Okay, if I move them back into the utility discussion. So I started in, I guess, on the water. It was very interesting to me and noteworthy that there was once upon a time a utilities master plan that suggested a public water main easement be extended east through the conservancy to kind of loop water in this location. Our access to water is in the southwest corner, and then there's water east through the conservancy, but that's very noteworthy because one of our first dialogues in our meetings with City of Middleton engineering staff as related to utility service connection, we were pointing out to them that you know, we want to make sure we're cognizant of the municipal water supply system, how this loops, what's the best path, what is you know, what has always been the plan for these platted lots for utility services. The investigation and what the city did was they commissioned Strand and Associates to take a look at what the correct utility service for this development might be. And it's noteworthy that with the water, future road construction, Pleasant View Road is going to provide the looping capacity further to the north. So an immediate connection for us just in the southwest corner on an interim basis, providing just a dead end connection for us would suffice, and that future looping would actually be preferred and be through the north of Pleasant View Road. And they would abandon the original plan for water connection east through the conservancy. Out of that report that Strand had done, it's also very noteworthy that of all the options considered for different sanitary sewer connections locations, the summary was that the most viable option was east through the Conservancy. So turning the attention from stormwater into these utilities, the big item that we'd like to talk about, or at least explain where we've been and where we're headed with sanitary service, is the connection east through the Conservancy to the sanitary system interceptor main that's down closer to the stream that heads to South Pond and other stormwater resources in the city. What we did was we presented basically two options to Conservancy Lands Commission for sanitary sewer connection. And one option is a straight line shot that's shown on this sheet C300. It follows an existing utility corridor that's a buried electric easement and a fiber optics utility. And the other option is to follow the sanitary down the path. Joe, if you can flip, there's a C300S disturbance sheet that kind of has an aerial in the background. Yep, that one right there, that'll work. So we took this graphic to Conservancy Lands Commission and we suggested to them, we basically have a couple of designs and we've got profiles for each of these two to consider, but one goes straight, is a straight line shot down there in red that you can see at the bottom of the screen. And the other is a green option that chases along the path and utilizes that previous disturbance, if you will, to the Conservancy for connection to the sanitary. We brought these two options to the Conservancy Lands Commission, and basically what the Conservancy challenged us with, and rightfully so, was to take a look at what are the specific tree impacts for both of these options? What's the constructability of both of these options? And comprehensively, how can the Conservancy gain or benefit from this development instead of the takeaway being a negative? So we went back to the drawing board, similar to water resources, and we've spent an ample amount of time identifying the different options here. The result of that is basically our recommendation, Joe, and if you can flip to, there's another aerial that just shows a new sanitary alignment that kind of actually marries the two together. Yeah, in this location here, what we're showing. So this path follows along the path for the first 2/3, 3/4 of the project before it jumps back into the alignment of the existing utility and ties into the interceptor main sewer. We feel this is the most viable, the least intrusive to the Conservancy, and we've got data to back that up. And also keeping in mind long-term maintenance provisions and considerations. A straight line path on a slope that's almost 2-to-1 had such anchoring requirements and manhole construction considerations that as a design engineer, I had serious concerns for 50, 70 years down the road when a pipe needs to be maintenance and another path of destruction through the Conservancy is required. I think it makes sense from a long-term viability and maintenance perspective that we can get to these manholes, we can get to these sewer pipes and remedy as we need to. But more importantly, and at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Bruce Allison to provide some of the tree input, but we staked the location of these sewers in the field. We met with the contractor in the field. We've done 2 exhaustive tree studies for both of these routes and the impact of this location. And I think it's a very good effort by everyone to listen to the concerns of the Conservancy and come back with a real proposal that makes sense for everyone. So Bruce, if you're listening or can jump in relative to the trees, I think this would be the time to discuss that.
Joe, I have one question for you. That is your option number 2, which you seem to prefer. To me, it seems it exposes so much of the Conservancy area to any break in sewer later, and also when you will be preparing this, I don't know what it does to the path. Would people be still able to use during this time, or you will be digging that out, or those are 2 big questions up front here.
Yeah, and Keith will speak to the constructability when we get to his portion of the presentation. I think the important thing to note is the timing of the sewer in the path that we've chosen is conventional construction means, so they can, think it in terms of building a sewer within a 10 or 12 foot travel lane on a busy city street. You know, they're going to work within those limitations, but in a conventional sewer construction like this path alignment allows for, you know, this sewer might take 30 days to construct in a tight timeline. So, and that sewer could be constructed, you know, at a time of least path use. So we could stagger construction of the sewer to be such that it's coming into the end of the winter months just before spring, and connect to the building really at any time in a long building construction process, but allows us that flexibility to work that into the use of the path.
Thank you.
Good. Well, Wade, I'll at this moment speak to the study that I did of the tree impact in the Conservancy. I was asked by Mr. Jim Stoppel to take a look at that particular path along the bike trail. And I was given the report by Stan Tech, which did an overview of the Conservancy generally and inventory of certain trees there. I was in conversation with Wade at Weiser Engineering, was able to go out on 4 occasions. Early on was able to see the staking that they had put out to see the routing. And then I used just the general logic of how one can make sure that there's minimum damage to those trees along the trail. I determined that assuming the trench is 4 feet wide, which means the actual excavation will probably be closer to 5 feet. There will be trench boxes used, that the impact on the root system, which is the important part, would be only on 3 black oak trees. There would be an arborvitae at the southern end that would need to be dug out, moved away, brought back, or some replacement. It's about a 4-inch arborvitae. So I'm hoping that all the Plan Commission members have in hand the report generated on April 11th. I don't have any slides to show, but if you have that in hand, I will go through the different parts of my report. The first is a general site observation and tree testing. Obviously, when I'm out on site, I'm doing a visual examination of the trees, and the 3 oaks that I determined were in a path that could not be saved, that is, they weren't necessarily directly in the trench, but the excavation would be close enough to the root zone that it would create a potential future hazard of the tree tipping over, or at least put the tree into decline. So those 3 I identified, and they're identified on the plan. The next step is to test those trees, see what the condition of those trees were. I used non-destructive testing techniques. One, an acoustic breast wave timer, an instrument that I developed at the Forest Products Lab. And it actually sends a stress wave through the trunk of the tree, measures the time of flight, and determines if you have any defect that might be reducing the velocity of that sound wave through the tree. The 3 trees that I made observations on indeed had numbers that suggested significant internal defect. I then followed on those 3 with another instrument, which is the PD400 micro drill. It's a 3-millimeter drill bit that is able to enter. And as you see on the graphs that I have presented as part of my plan, it shows changes in amplitude, which reflect the resistance to that very small needle-like drill going in there. Higher resistance, of course, indicates that you have more solid wood. As shown on those 3 particular graphs, you will see dramatic reductions in the amplitude of the graph, which tells you passing through a defect. The first particular tree, which is a 20-inch black oak, I made just through my observation. Trees are self-optimized organisms. They will lay down additional wood if there is decay on them and try to aid and pick up a uniform distribution of those stresses. I could see that there.
Could you speak a little bit louder? I guess you're.
Yes, I'll get a little closer to the microphone. Is that better, Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, sir.
The first tree has a lean across the trail, has significant internal defect, and is one that even if there wasn't to be disturbance in that area, I would recommend that the Conservancy Committee be removed for the safety of those passing underneath. The International Society of Arboriculture has different literature and research to help us assess the nature of risk around trees. I have a qualification that they have generated called the Tree Risk Assessment Qualification. And we take a look at the probability of failure multiplied by the consequences of failure. Obviously, if a large 20-inch red oak with an extreme lean was to fall across that trail at a critical moment, it would be very problematic for any passer-by underneath. So the other two trees who also have defects going on internally would not necessarily have been removed, but I think without question, if indeed the trench goes as designed on this particular route, it will be removed. And in my report, I speak to the general condition and mitigating factors on their removal. The next part of my report, I think, is very critical, and that is called planning for tree protection during the routing. Obviously, you're going to have some disturbance. When you start any construction project, you don't often know what problems you're going to be finding. There's no question that a qualified commercial arborist should be on site during critical moments to advise the construction people when they get near a tree, if certain roots are exposed, how to protect those roots by not pulling on them, but rather having a sawzall or some reciprocal saw to cut those roots. Very standard procedures. Being proactive and making sure that accidents that might occur with equipment do not bump into trees. I strongly recommend that, again, if this route is chosen, that there be plywood protection put around the trees. Very simple, inexpensive. Plywood can be reused, but if indeed a truck happens to slip, it's not going to be causing problems with the trunk and the bark of the tree. Minimizing the trench width is important. And again, having somebody on site when you're in proximity to those trees to help guide that process, I think is very important. If this occurs during the oak wilt season, which by DNR standards runs from April 1 into later in the summer, although most municipalities have sometimes said as late as October 15th or at least October 1st. If there is any cutting of those roots and the wound is not going to be covered immediately, an oak wilt protocol by painting those wounds to create a barrier to the ingress of the oak wilt spores is very important. Avoiding any collateral damage to neighboring trees is important, and by putting the spoils from that trench onto the root system, you can create compaction, and quite often in the process of refilling the trench, one backhoe might dig in beyond where
you had the original soil line. So it's very critical that something be laid down to reduce compaction and make sure that there's no additional digging. And that's fairly easily done. 3/4 inch plywood, sometimes geotextile material can do this. I would suggest that even steel plates, and I presume the trench would be dug incrementally with equipment following the backhoe, and the spoils could be put down, the pipe laid in, and then backfilled. I've been on many construction sites where that is very successful. Lastly, I was asked to just make some general comments about the Stantec assessment of the Conservancy and their suggestions for some improvements by taking out invasive species. Very typical. I was on the Board of Visitors of the UW Arboretum, which of course is a leader in that ecological restoration and dealing with invasive species. The only improvements I would suggest to the Stantec plan would be not only to lay down additional herbaceous plants that are native that would help and protect those important the slopes and very significant slopes in that area. But I also strongly recommend that an effort be made to replant, particularly the oaks from the white oak family, the whites and the burrs. A cross between a swamp white oak and a bur oak is the Shutai oak. It's one of my favorites. These have greater resistance to oak wilt in case wilt ever move through that area. There's a lot of black, red pin oaks that would be affected by that. So for the sustainability, planting even bare root stock by hand, it's not that expensive, would, I think, go a long way to have a sustainable conservancy that would be around for the next generation. It's a beautiful site, and the elevations and the bike trail are great additions and contributions to the community. And I think suggested improvements by the Stantec report and with additional planting would create a very sustainable conservancy for years to come. And I'm happy to address any questions that anybody might have.
Yeah, Bruce, I have a question right here. Then option number 1, you left 20 trees, and then option number 2, you have 27. But it's only 3 or 4 trees which will be impacted. And what is the context of these 20 and 27 trees?
I'm having a hard time understanding that. Are you referring? Are you referring?
If you were to look in table 1, so there's a tree survey result. This is for corridor option 1, and you have a 20 trees, and most of them are essentially oaks, except one hackberry. So, and you're not going with option 1, but you're going with option 2. In option 2, you have 27 trees, which I can count. Again, most of them are oaks. So, but out of those, there are only 3 you think will be impacted. So I was just wondering, what is the why are these other trees listed, or what is the relevance here?
And Mayor, what you're referring to is a Stantec report that was submitted on April 10th. And I was not involved in producing that report. I was just asked to read it and to make comments with any additions that I thought were appropriate. And that is a tree inventory where they went beyond just that immediate zone around the bike trail. What I did when I came on was had the advantage, of course, of having the survey already done with the manholes marked along that. And of course, between the manholes, a great line of sight. So I could tell, even though the actual trail wasn't marked, where that trench would go. And using that information, I was able to determine that there were only 3 oak trees
that would sustain damage that I felt was beyond repair and would require the removal of those 3 trees. The other trees in that area would have the trench with, again, proper during construction guidance outside of that root plate area, which is what gives the tree stability, and in my opinion, would be very favorable and not sustain any impact that would in any symptomatic way set them back.
Okay, questions for Bruce? Or questions, are we ready to have questions for anyone?
I think so.
Okay, so questions for anyone. Wade, Bruce, Lee.
I think, Wade, were you done with your portion? Wade?
Yeah, I'm complete with mine, Joe.
We also had Keith Middleton from Stevens, who was going to speak a little bit about means and methods of construction and touch on the blasting, if that's okay.
Joe and Keith, could I interrupt for just a quick moment? Jim Stoppel?
Sure.
Just to add on to Professor Allison's report, I have discussed the Conservancy with Jeff Straubel at length, and we've discussed Professor Allison's report at length, as well as the current state of health of the Conservancy that perhaps Professor Allison can address as well. And in the Stantec report, we asked him, what would it take to bring this Conservancy back to what we would consider a healthy life that would extend the life of it for many, many years, remove the invasive species, and make it a conservancy that the city could be proud of. And Joshua from the Stantec group came back with a rough proposal of about $50,000 to resurrect the conservancy, possibly add some of the seedlings that Professor Allison addressed. And so Jeff Straubel has agreed that if we can get the cooperation, the neighbor cooperation from the city and everyone else, he will fund the resurrection of the conservancy to try to bring it back to a level of health that he feels, or that Professor Allison feels, is in the best interest of the conservancy and the city of Middleton. And perhaps, Professor Allison, you could address that a little bit if you would be so kind.
Yes, the Stantec report and speaks to clearing out the invasives, which again, as I say, a lot of research has been done, the UW Arboretum, on that ecological restoration. The invasives, of course, create an environment where you don't have a normal regeneration. A healthy woods, you want to have multiple ages because you have inevitable senescence of the trees, and you want to have the next smaller, younger group there to fill in.
Can't hear you very well.
You want to have the next generation of trees, so you want to have a multiple age band, and you also don't want to have the invasives coming in, the buckthorns, the honeysuckle, which are the woody plant. There's the mulberries in there also. You'd like to remove those so that you end up having the opportunity for regeneration. So when the acorns go into the ground, they will end up as young seedlings. But I think, strongly believe that we need to also go to the next step of actually doing some planting in there. And I also recognize that the functionality of the woods is not just shade and green space, but it also provides a wonderful habitat for wildlife. And to be able to put in some understory plants that will attract birds migrating through. There's university bulletins on landscape to enhance wildlife habitat.
I think doing those kinds of things on top of taking out the invasives would make a big difference to the enjoyment for generations to come for that particular conservancy.
You're on mute, Abby.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Great. Like I said, Keith Masuston is here with Stevens to chat about some means and methods and address some of the issues that are brought up. Keith, are you there?
Okay.
It looks like he's there.
Can everybody hear me?
There we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, as Joe mentioned, I'm Keith Masuston with Stevens Construction. I've been working with the development team a number of months now. Been involved with this project for quite some time. But just kind of wanted to echo some of the things that Abby had mentioned earlier with her. I think that one of the greatest concerns with this project is the blasting that would be involved. So like Abby had mentioned earlier, the blasting in the state of Wisconsin is regulated by DSPS, Wisconsin Department of Safety and Public Services. And there's information posted online under SPS 307. So we've in turn met with several different potential contractors that are licensed through the state of Wisconsin, familiar with the territory, have done work locally and whatnot. They've reviewed the site conditions and feel very confident in what they're proposing for the project. As we all know, we do have Northwestern Stone is across the street, and they have been blasting in their quarry for a number of years. I kind of emphasized this earlier with PBD, and that the blasting that they do is significantly different than what we would be proposing. Means and methods wise, they're blasting in a quarry, sometimes 80 to 100 foot rock walls that they're blasting at a time, whereas our efforts would be significantly more localized on a lot smaller scale. The frequency would be a little bit higher, but the scale itself is quite a bit smaller. They have, I do have some rough numbers that they put together on anticipated IPS inches per second, which correlates to some vibration data, which I can send out to Abby and the development team in the next day or so. And then I guess the other couple items that came up were just the request for potentially doing a test blast, which we can work through with the city and PBD if necessary. A couple of the other items, the slope stabilization study and the geotech stuff, Abby will work on getting some info together as well on that. So that pretty much touches on the blasting. As far as the construction side, the project is roughly a 20-month schedule. We're anticipating hopefully starting later this fall and then turning over in 2022. That's what I got.
Okay, anybody else? Joe or Wade or Bruce or Jim, anybody else who needs to speak?
No, that was what we had. We obviously are here to answer any questions. And I just want to inquire. I know, Abby, you said there was 3 additional conditions of approval. I don't know, Jim, if you've been able to review those or not. But maybe if not, we
Sorry,
want a little more detail on those.
Yeah, these just came up this afternoon during the call that I had with Justin Kuka. I'll try to quick share my screen so you guys can see the 3 additional things beyond what was included in the packet.
Abby, if I can address these 3, Jim Stoppel, I think our goal is to make this project work and be as helpful to our neighbors, both PPD and the neighbors to the south. And that has always been Jeff Straubel's position as well through the 40 years that he's worked with the city of Middleton and all of the things he has done. We will need to look at each of these items and see, does a geotech consultant come up with some instability in the slope and the cliff? Certainly, we'll have to address that before we can proceed with construction. And the same with each of these items, but I think we need to see what is realistic that needs to be done, and we will do those things that I'm sure that are realistic, and they can be put as part of the conditions. We're hoping for approval tonight from Plan Commission, subject to the items that you have placed in the report tonight as contingencies that have to be fulfilled.
Thank you, Jim.
I guess.
Okay, any questions from the Plan Commission now?
Mayor,
Yeah,
this is Kurt. I have a question for Joe, Jolie.
Yes.
So this is way back, I didn't know we were going to take questions on individuals. When you look back at your view sheds and you showed a kind of axiometric drawing of the building, you've got the 3 stories of underground parking and then ground level.
Yes.
From ground level until the top of the building, not the top of the tower, but from the ground level to the top of the building, what is the height of this building? I know you said 14 stories, but how many feet tall is this?
Oh, that would be, oh, I can't share my screen, but I can get you a,
Oh, here, I can stop share if you have enough, Joe.
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I see the final elevation, but I don't know the height of the building.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't want to.
Wait, I do see it now. 147 feet, right?
That sounds right.
Yes. And the Wisconsin Trade Center is currently the tallest building in Middleton. That's 134. Is that correct?
I wouldn't know that. Yep, 147 feet.
If approved, this would be the tallest building in Middleton, correct?
That's my understanding. I don't know that for a fact.
and also
So-
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mayor.
No, go ahead and finish, I apologize.
Well, I don't know if we're in the discussion phase or the question phase, but process-wise, it's unfortunate that so many of the other committees moved on to very specific design skills and design issues. And I know that you guys addressed a whole range of issues that that were brought up to you by all the other committees, but there's still that one issue that hasn't really been addressed, which is the height. And I know that that's actually the biggest concern for people.
Well, we did bring this in front of the Plan Commission once before on a conceptual level, and as memory serves, there were no objections from this body in that regard. We did also bring it to the airport commission, where they examined the height closely and debated it, and had no objections with it as well.
My recollection of the meeting is a little different, that we very specifically decided not to grant concept approval. Or not to even make a motion one way or the other.
I don't disagree with that. I don't know what you would like me to say. I'm just saying this has been 14 stories for a year, and it's been in front of this commission at least once, if not twice, and we thought that would be a major thing that would have been an objection would have been voiced by this committee significantly prior to today, if there was an objection.
I thought there were a lot of objections to the height.
I've never heard that, Kurt. Do you have an objection to the height?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm not normally one against tall buildings and density, but I think there's a lot of people who think it's really tall for that site. I know there's a significant slope.
I do remember, I think it was the mayor that asked in the first meeting what the implication would be if we could lower the height of the building by 2 or 3 stories. And I'm going by memory here.
Right.
And then we came back and we expressed the rationale behind not being able to reduce the height because of various reasons.
Joe, if I
remember that.
Jim Stoppel, if I could possibly chime in, Joe.
Absolutely.
We talked about this at one of the meetings, and it was the only meeting I think there was height was issued. Was the first few stories, you have all the cost of your parking garage, your foundations, your footings, everything else. And so we went over this with Stevens Construction as well as a cost. And as the assessor indicated when we took this to the assessor for the city of Middleton, he noted that the profitability of this project is not as great as one might generally expect from a development like this. And as you put each story onto a project, you dilute the cost of the footings, the foundation, the parking garages, et cetera, somewhat, including in this particular case, the cost we're going to have for bringing sanitary sewer to the building, where generally, if you're going to do a development like this, it's going to create the tax revenue for the city. The city is the one that brings the sanitary sewer to the lot edge of the project. But each time you add a story, it costs you less to add that top story than it does to add the first story. So in order to get the economies to make this thing work, we need those additional stories that cost less per square foot to construct than the lower level. I also have a perspective that I shared at one of the meetings that literally the biggest, the shortest asset we have in Dane County and in Middleton is land, and we're using it so rapidly. And if we can try to increase the density where it's appropriate and necessary and fits, I think it's a huge benefit. This project, I think, fits this site extremely well. I think it uses the site extremely well, with 50% of it being green. And the economics of it makes the size of this building exactly what it is. So it'll be very difficult to economically make it work and generate the tax base for the city of Middleton if we start taking stories off.
Abby, with that, can I ask a question? I know that TIF is not in our purview, but there will be a TIF request for this.
Yes.
And
We haven't taken the TIF request forward to the finance committee because under the new TIF policy, the project either needs concept review or they need zoning in place.
I just wanted to clarify something you said earlier. Do you consider this to be a greenfield multifamily site or an infill site for TIF purposes?
I think it's, I would call it greenfield. I mean, it's not a redevelopment project.
Because
it's surrounded by development, so I guess you could call it greenfield and it's infill.
Because our TIF policies prohibit or discourage greenfield market rate multifamily, correct?
That is correct. So the way that our TIF policy is set up, there are 3 categories. The first one being that the land use is appropriate to even move on to the second category for review. I will say that since the city council adopted the TIF policy, there has been a greenfield multifamily project that has received TIF, and that's the Graber View development. And also that in addition to this development, there is another one that is being proposed currently, and we haven't brought forward a recommendation on it at this point. A portion of the TIF for this project would be allocated toward the need for the city to acquire some property from this development site, because we need the additional roadway, but we also need additional right-of-way for the bike ped overpass. It's late. And so that to me is the cut and dry case for some TIF assistance.
That's the main question I had. I just want to hear from the rest of the commission.
Thank you, Kurt.
This is Leaf Hubbard.
Yeah, please.
Yes, okay, thank you. To get back where Kurt was coming from relative to the height of the building, that certainly was discussed, and I know that there's certainly concern about that, and that was brought up at the October 8th meeting of the Plan Commission. I've been following this right along through all the different commissions and committees, and it to be quite honest, it seems to be a project that has many challenges associated with it, has been brought to light by many of the different committees it's gone to. And while some of the committees have provided some approval or have given approval, it seemed to be in a reluctant way and with many strings attached. As we can see, we're still trying to resolve additional issues as this project is moved forward. I just want to, I remember the meeting more like Kurt has described it than how others have outlined it, at least at October 8th meeting, where height was an issue with this plan, with the Plan Commission.
Thanks, Lee. Other questions?
My recollection of the discussion that was had at previous planning commission meetings was similar. I mean, certainly there was concern with the height of the building, and I think some of the things that we had asked about at that point was to bring back those elevations, which you've since done, Joe, kind of showing that building in the context of the surrounding area. And although it is a tall building, my personal feeling is that I think it generally blends in well, given its proximity to some of the other taller office buildings there along Greenway. And I think, although it is a great amount of density, I mean, I would tend to support the development as proposed.
Thank you. My other comments. or questions? Edith, you have something?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't part of the planning commission in October, so I certainly don't remember any discussion about height. I'm floored at the concept that we wouldn't find 14 stories acceptable. I mean, I would question why we don't have 45 stories, or moving toward trying to come up with a higher density in this town in order to support the kind of transportation that this city thinks they need over the next 30 years. We need to start thinking about the concept that we don't need to be a 2, 3, 4-story town anymore. Sometimes you want a higher density pocket, and greenways and this particular area is most definitely a reasonable place to put the higher density, in my way of thinking. And I think just to have this beautiful hillside as a location for an accent building, which they've done a very nice job of designing to make it look like a, I don't know, like a, it gives us something to point to and be proud of. It's, it's something I think is a good thing for us. I have a very very strong feeling that way. That's it.
Yes, Lee, if you have something to add? Okay, so anyone else?
I was just going to point out one of the reasons I'm conflicted about this is the justification for the height is to make the building economically viable. I certainly understand that. But then if the height is required to make it economically viable, but it's not economically viable without TIF as well, then the question is, could we go 16 or 18 stories to make it not require TIF? I mean, what's the upper limit on that?
Tim, you want to answer? Tim or anyone else?
It was more of a rhetorical question.
I'm happy to address it. Kurt, I went back to my notes, and we did have a plan commission meeting, first informal meeting about November 11th. And at that time, you had a quick question about 12 stories versus 14 stories. And on December 1st, I sent you an email that talked about the 14 stories versus 12, and the same exact cost analysis that I provided to you a few moments ago was in that email I sent to you at 9:53 a.m. on the December 1st. And can we go to 16 stories, 17 stories, 18 stories without TIF? I can only say that we've been visiting with the city for well over a year, I believe now, on this project. And Jeff Straubel has spent just short of $1 million so far in the investment and the development. And it's unfortunate that I guess we're addressing this at this stage, but I understand your question. And I'd have to go back to Jeff Straubel, but he has a plan to put this project in the ground or starting in late summer, to go back to the drawing board and now add another 4 stories to it. And I think we're taking the TIF topic out of the equation. I think is going to be extremely difficult. And Mr. Jeff has put up with tremendous amount. I shouldn't say put up with, that's a wrong verbiage. He has done his very, very best to accommodate everybody in every step of the way, including being willing to put $50,000 into improving of the conservancy, put the stormwater, the sanitary sewer system in himself and pay for all of it, as well as the reconstruction of the path. I'm just hoping that this body can get past that today so we can move forward with this project as quickly as possible. Joe, looks like you had a question or an issue.
Not a question, but just to further that point, I mean, we had to get FAA approval to get I think we're topped out at our height using that communication tower as the basis of our height limitation.
If anyone else, I have a few comments here, and I want to say developer has worked long and hard on this project, presenting this to many of our city committees for their approval in the process. And as Jim said, invested a lot of money here. My beginning question is that the original proposal, as you remember, was 4 to 5 stories. Why did we jump from 4 to 5 stories to 14? What happened?
I think the original proposal was for 6 stories, and it had significant impact on conservancy land. There would be significant tree removal, and the feedback as we walked the site from our 15 was that it was a non-starter.
Well, they could remove trees from the conservancy. Yeah, I mean, they could only remove from their own site.
Yeah, but it had significant impact on the conservancy.
Abby, if I can address Jim Stoppel, one other item. The roadway decided that they were going through at that time, with which we were unfamiliar with before, and we're going to take land or need land to be able to create the 4-lane highway, and the slope that was required to drop that 4-lane highway down, I believe 15 to 20 feet from its current level. And so it was really that taking of land, and the 6-story project left the facility with very little green space. It was my push very hard to try to get density, but leave green space for the benefit of everyone. And that's what kind of prompted us to totally shift gears and look towards a high-rise project that perhaps was of a much higher caliber than what the original project was, which that was 260 units that was going to take up, or 274 units, I believe, that was going to take up almost the entire parcel with very, very little green space.
Thank you, Jim. Well, right now my biggest concern is PPD. They are our largest employer. So right now they have 1,600 people, and they're likely to have 2,000. And they're also high-paying job, and they have many serious concerns. And that is, we want to keep PPD. We don't want them to, in any way, affect their business. This is my concern number one. And this project does seem to, or possibly, affect that, because their contract with right now it's up to 2028, and the businesses start planning long before. So this is really my biggest concern. And the second is, as the others have pointed out as well, Kitty, of course, has a great view here that having the tallest building at one of the highest points in Middleton, and which leads to, we have the best golf course in the area, the public golf courses, and the golf course committee still isn't. I know it does not, as far as the view of the lake and capital is concerned, this project doesn't really impact that. But it still seems to impact the golf committee. I still need to talk to them. The condos to the east, it seems like you're addressing their concern, but still may have some. But there are 2 other committees. I happen to be at the meeting at the Water Resources Management Commission. So when I left, I thought they were not going to approve it. But they were so reluctant, and somebody made a motion, and there was no second. After some arm twisting, there was a second, and they reluctantly approved it. And I still think they still want to have a look at this. I don't think they were very happy in doing this. And the CLC is still looking into it. And a lot of our projects, one of the things which we all know in Middleton is having more affordable housing, and this is not one of them. So I have these few concerns, and that's why I can really, put my heart and soul behind it right now. So I will stop it here. So any other questions or comments?
Mayor, Leslie, with that discussion and understanding that you just provided, along with all the other meetings that I've been able to read minutes on. I move that GIP not be approved. That's my motion.
Okay, need a second. Need a second. Okay, I will second it for the sake of discussion, so. Okay, so let's have a.
So just a process clarification. You're recommending that we not approve the GIP, but would you be open to an amendment that we still forward it to Common Council with a negative recommendation? Because ultimately, the choice on the rezoning is council's, not ours. Sometimes if we,
Yep,
sometimes if
I'll
we
accept that friendly amendment.
Sometimes if we vote a GIP down, then it just stays in Plan Commission, and ultimately, it would require I think it requires a special petition by council to pull it out of Plan Commission and back to council. And this way, the ultimate decision would be to council.
I accept the friendly amendment.
Just to clarify the motion, so the motion by Leaf, seconded by motion by Hubbard, seconded by Barr, to recommend that the council not approve the.
No, Plan Commission doesn't approve and send it to the.
Send it to the council without a recommendation.
No, send it to the council with a recommendation of denial.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So essentially, when you said, Leaf, you're recommending that that you not approve the GIP. You're basically saying to recommend denying the GIP.
Correct.
Essentially, or to not approve the rezoning. So to recommend not approving, denial the rezoning, let's say, to recommend denial. I don't want to put words in your mouth, though. Is that the intent?
It is the intent.
Denial of zoning.
Zoning and the GIP.
Of rezoning to the PDD and GIP.
Correct. Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this motion? And Dan is recusing himself, so. Okay, so.
And Mayor, I just wanted to say, because we have one absence and one recusal, that's why I felt it's important that the ultimate decision goes to council, because it might not be considered fair if a different person had been absent today or not. So this way the applicant gets a full hearing at council.
No, I agree with you, Kurt. That's a great idea. Okay, so should we have a roll call voting then on this one? Or?
Farrar?
Well, for the motion of denial, yes.
Ramsey is abstaining. Paulson?
Aye.
Tyson?
I'm struggling with this. I want to say no because I don't buy it. I support moving ahead with this thing.
Hubbard?
Aye.
Slavish?
No.
The motion passes 3-2.
And it goes to the city council. So. Okay, move on to the item number 5. So that doesn't even. So that is.
Staff had recommended deferral.
Okay, need a second?
Second.
So the motion is to defer by whom?
Yeah, by Kurt Paulson, and he seconded it.
No, it wasn't a motion. I was just reading that staff recommends deferral, but I'll make it as a motion. That's fine.
Okay, all right. Any questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion, for the rest of the aye?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. Okay, need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
we are